Hi, I'm Jay from Jade Productions, and the following is a list breakdown video of an upcoming list that I've made for a tournament that I'm attending in late November. So, the following lists were played a single game thus far, and are the consideration for the lists that both me and T are going to enter into the tournament. Now, I've already made some changes, but the purpose of this video is to examine the lists, what they did, how they worked, especially since I was using some of the new Phoenix Rising stuff for the Eldar. And it was at quite a high points level. And it was certainly an interesting game. So, the lists for the tournament are at 2,500 points. T was taking an Imperial Guard Cadian Super Heavy Detachment, a Imperial Guard Cadian Heavy Support Detachment, the whatever the one it is that requires 3 heavy supports, the Spearhead Detachment, and then was taking a battalion of Tempestus Scions in this list. Now, T's list, which we'll start with first, since it was relatively simple, comprised of, in the Super Heavy, comprised of 3 different Baneblades. The Hellhammer, with its massive AP-4 shotgun, with 3d6 shots, strength 12, to flat 3 damage, complete with all the trimmings that you can give a Baneblade, including mounted stubber, for reasons. A Stormlord, with its massive Mega Bolter, and a Shadow Sword. Pretty standard. 1 for killing infantry, 1 for killing monsters and everything between tanks and heavy infantry, and 1 for killing Titanics. In the Spearhead, there was 3 units of heavy weapon teams, 1 unit with mortars, another unit with mortars, and another unit with las cannons. And then there was a Primaris Psyker and a Tech Priest. The Primaris Psyker knew Night Shroud, and the other one that gives... No, it just knew Night Shroud for -1 to hit. Now, the heavy weapon teams in T's deployment actually go, for the idea of this list, is that they sit inside the Stormlord and act as a fire base, providing him with extra infantry clearing shots that don't require line of sight, as well as extra las cannons. The battalion then included 2 Tempestus Scion commanders, both with rods. Then it included a Valkyrie, with which to put the Tempestus into, in which he put 2 Tempestus squads, both loaded out, 2 Tempestus command squads, both loaded out with 4 melters each. And they were riding inside a Valkyrie with all the weapons the Valkyrie can have. The rest of the battalion was 3 squads of Tempestus, 1 with volley guns, another one with volley guns, and another one with plasma guns, 2 of each. He spent a CP before the battle began to make the Tempestus battalion using a specialist detachment from Vigilus Ablaze, which would allow his forces, his Tempestus, to drop out without penalty, and gain a +1 on the turn they disembark within 6 inches of his scions when they arrive on the board. So that was his list, and I think it's a very strong list for 2,500 points. It covers a lot of bases. It was definitely very terrifying, and in a pre-2018 circuit where you're doing one drop at a time, it definitely would have deployed first and had the upper hand over my list. However, the whole thing was that we were doing Maelstrom of War, which is what we're expecting at this tournament, a mixture of Maelstrom and Eternal, depending on the scenarios, which have yet to be announced to us players. And the fact that at 2,500 points, it's a lot of models, and we only have 2 hours to play. So the encouragement was to bring small, very expensive armies, i.e. lots of super heavies. Now T has vast collections. He owns a lot of super heavies, including 3 Baneblades, which can all be assembled into all the different Baneblade options. And those were the 3 he went with, and it was a list that in Maelstrom doesn't perform as well with holding objectives, but can definitely table if it's deadly. However, under the 2018 rules, in chapter approved, players roll off, and when they roll off, the winner of the roll off then selects who gets to deploy first, and the person who deploys first then gets to select who goes first. It's not worded that way, but that's essentially how it works. Which means winning that roll-off is very important, followed by seizing. Now, I won the roll-off with my Eldar list, which was going into the match. T very much said to me, "I don't like your list," and I quote, "It's cancerous crap that means I don't get to play the game." Which I found hilarious, since he was bringing 3 Baneblades and I had a single super heavy that I considered more of a tax. So for the Eldar, I decided I would go with and use many of the new Phoenix Rising stuff, especially in this match, to see how it worked. In retrospect, and I have some thoughts on the Phoenix Rising stuff, which will be in a different video for Eldar, specifically Craftworld Eldar, I don't think many of them are worth it, in terms of psychic powers and the runes of fortune. The aspect powers, that's pretty different. So my force consisted of a battalion of Craftworld Eldar, using the Altioch, and then a Supreme Command detachment, also using Altioch. Now, my battalion, had a Farseer Skyrunner with the Shuriken Pistols, the Singing Spear, and then was running with Guide, Doom, and the new Impair Senses Runes of Fortune spell, instead of Smite. Now, having done this once, I definitely think I took a terrible loadout on that Farseer. Guide and Doom are good. Impair Senses is potentially very, very good, given the Eldar have great mobility and very much pick who to put it on. However, the issue arose where the thing I put Impair Senses on typically just died that same turn, because the things I wanted to put Impair Senses on were things I was worried about that if I didn't kill it, it would live and just tear me to pieces. I still think Impair Senses is the best of the Runes of Fortune. I still think it's an auto-include. I don't think it goes well over Smite. Doom is an auto-include. Without Doom, with Eldar's high mix of Strength 6 weaponry, and then its high mix of Strength 8 and above weaponry, and that weird mix of Strength 6 is not where you want to be in most cases. You want to be at Strength 7 or 8 is where this edition is really good. Either at Strength 4 or at Strength 7 and 8. Doom was pretty much essential for making my Strength 6 high AP stuff go through, and for making my shuriken weapons in general just that much better with the AP that they get on 6s, and just fishing for that. Especially given the Aeldar's high accuracy. Guide was originally there mostly to support the units I thought would be terrible and let me down with bad rolling. A single bad to hit roll would mean a ludicrous turn in which my Aeldar army would explode into confetti if they happened to hit me. The -1 from Altiok helping with that. I definitely think in this particular list, while I'm a huge fan of Guide and have used it every edition as a staple psychic power for my Eldar, I think it's better exchanged for Fortune to provide a feel no pain to some of my bigger units, particularly my super heavy, or to provide mortal wounds in the form of Executioner, which I think is better than the standard Smite, simply because it's a potential to kill something with those D3 and then hit another unit for D3 as well. So I wonder what everyone's opinion are. Please comment in the comments below if you have thoughts on this, about what you think is the proper sort of loadout for this Farseer Skyrunner now that we have the Runes of Fortune, if you've seen them around. I think Compare Senses and Doom are, and then Executioner is probably the way to go, or either exchange Executioner for Fortune and take Smite instead. The second HQ in my battalion is just a standard Warlock, which was running with a different, which was running with Conceal Reveal, as well as the Ghost Walk, as well as the Crushing Orb. The Crushing Orb, I definitely see the potential to be better than a Smite. However, something this battle really taught me, and I'll elaborate it a bit more, was that I think even the 1d3 mortal, the 1 mortal wound destructor, is probably better. However, giving this guy, his main role was just to cast Conceal on my heavy aspect warriors. Dark Reapers! Oh my, something in my throat. For my 3 troops, I had 2 lots of 10 Guardian Defenders with no heavy weapons platforms. Just a standard screen and jumping on objectives. Then I had 5 Rangers, just because they're cheap. They synergize with Altiok. I'd take more Rangers if I had them, but I only have 5 metal old Rangers in my collection. I don't know why, but I do. Then I have 5 Fire Dragons, one of which is an Exarch with the Fire Pike. Now, this time I took the Tank Killer Aspect Power, which would let me reroll my damage, because the Fire Dragons were something that I was expecting to pop out of my transports, be able to melt something, and with Guide, I can do very well and destroy it, or with Doom, I'm going to be wounding even if I miss 1 or 2 shots, so damage becomes much more important. And when you're rolling, preferably, the 2d6 damage and you get a really terrible result, rerolling just the 1 can be really important. So, hence why I gave them that particular... Now, it only applies for the Exarch, but it's important. Then I had 5 Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons. Very expensive unit that gives me an interesting amount of cost benefit. They've never really earned their points back, and my number 1 regret in life is not building them with D-sides. But the tournament is what you see is what you get. So, 5 Wraithguard, and I can't say they didn't do any work. They contribute as a nice distraction Khan effects. They are pretty tanky with the right spells, and their guns, when they hit, hurt. Then, 6 Swooping Hawks, with the Fast Shot Exarch power, the Sun Rifle on the Exarch for his power, for his weapon. Then 10 Warp Spiders, because you would never leave home without your Warp Spiders in a huge blob. Funnily enough, they were both my savior in this test game, and not hugely beneficial. Something I'm debating, though, is both in terms of the Swooping Hawks and the Wraithguard. Now, this is a question open to the commenters. Are the Wraithguard with Wraith Cannons worth it, or should I be looking for including a different heavy weapons platform in my army? Like, for their price point, I can get a Wraith Lord packing a lot of heavy weapons and a melee weapon that can also serve as distraction card effects. Or I can bring in some War Walkers with a huge mix of weapons. And the Swooping Hawks, for their points cost, they're useful, but I'm expecting to fight a lot of super heavies in this tournament, and Swooping Hawks, their grenades are not fantastic against those, and neither are their weapons. But they can help me claim objectives in a Maelstrom situation. Next, and on to the topic of the Warp Spiders, I actually picked a power that a lot of people have talked with me about it for their X-Arch powers. Which one is the best one for the Warp Spiders, I mean. Now, I chose Web of Deceit, knowing that it was, functionally, not the most fantastic aspect power you could pick. But Web of Deceit, I saw something really neat in its potential, in that, yes, the Warp Spiders are really fast. They can go really, really far. But what if you just take away the need to do that with Web of Deceit, and you use that once per game thing where you need to nab an objective, or just get somewhere, on the opposite side of the board, with no muss, no fuss, and you've only got limited time to do it. Use Web of Deceit to just pick up your surviving Warp Spiders, and drop them behind an enemy Baneblade, in cover, behind line of sight, where they can potentially pop out with a stratagem or in the next turn to take shots and score the objective for behind enemy lines. So, I think in Maelstrom, that's actually a really great power. Now, I think it's actually probably one of the more underappreciated powers that I've had a discussion about with other Eldar players, and I'm a really big fan of it. Now, for Dark Reapers. Dark Reapers are one of those things of you should never leave home without them in any sort of Eldar list. So, I have a squad of 5 in my battalion, including one X-Arch, who is armed just with a standard Reaper launcher, nothing else, just to save on points. And I exchanged his X-Arch power for the fast shot, to give the X-Arch an extra shot, because, let's face it, the Dark Reaper's Reaper launchers are fantastic. And I can't say how much that was worth it, but Dark Reapers themselves basically carried my army. But I don't want to cheese out running too many more of them, and I don't own that many. Next, in my second heavy support, I had a Fire Prism. It's a standard Fire Prism, I only own the one, sadly, and it's never been too well for me, but it definitely proved its worth in this game. Gave it Crystal Targeting Matrix, Shuriken Cannon, Spirit Stones, Hemlock Wraith Fighter, with Spirit Stones, of course, it has by default its D-sides. I gave it Protect and Jinx. It can only cast Jinx, but I think it's fantastic power to give the Hemlock. I would rather had replaced its Smite with a Runes of Fortune, as particularly impair senses, but according to the rules I can't actually do that. So Jinx works fantastic, and having a Baneblade with no save was pretty fantastic, and reducing, basically counteracting Knights with their 4-ups going back up to 5-up invols, their 5-up invols going to 6-up invols. I think Jinx is one of those essential things for the mission I'm going, for the expected tournament and competition I'm going into. Then I had 2 Wave Serpents. Now, the Wave Serpents, I decided to go with the same loadout, identical to both, with the exception of one, just because the lots of shuriken cannons is a fantastic loadout, but I only have the one of them built that way. So, and I wanted to bring 2 of them. Maybe I have one too many wave serpents for what I'm wanting to carry, because in this game, the idea for this list is to put the fire dragons and 2 warlocks, or 1 warlock in one, and then the Wraith Guard with the other warlock in the other. And sort of just race them up the field while giving some supporting fire. It also means some potential mortal wounds and some pretty tanky vehicles. Wave Serpents can take a lot. I was rather upset that during the course of the game I actually lost one to Overwatch, because defensive gunners on a Baneblade and spiking the dice rolls allowed for that. Somehow. Anyway. So both Wave Serpents have Crystal Targeting Matrices, they both have Shuriken Cannons, they both have Spirit Stones, they both have Twin Star Cannons for their turrets, and then one of them has Vectored Engines for if they advance, they get the -1 to hit penalty, and that's really just points to do with points. Next, the Supreme Command Detachment, where I had an Autarch on foot, Warlord, so I can get the potential CP back, Banshee Mask, because why wouldn't you? It's free. Falchu's Wing to make a really cheap unit really bloody fast. Fantastic. And then just Force Shield, Shuriken, and Power Sword. And then 2 more Warlocks. One with Spear. One with Witchblade. Quicken and Restrain, as well as the Divergence of, or Fateful Divergence Rune of Power, which essentially gives the Salamander reroll trait. I cast it on an Uzuriani infantry, and I get to reroll 1 hit, 1 wound, 1 save per basically round. I didn't end up using it. I used Quicken. I think that was actually really a mistake. I did a misplay there. I'm not really sure how I feel about Fateful Divergence. I think it could be good. I think maybe I was trying to cast it on the wrong thing, expecting to cast it on the wrong thing. The other one was running the Ghost Walk, just to try it out. Didn't use it at all. And it was also running Enhanced Drain. Didn't work at all. Particularly because the army I was fighting, whenever I got into combat, on the rare occasion I was able to get into combat to tie things up, the Imperial Guard just used a stratagem, and the stratagem just read, flat, you hit on a 2-up. And modifiers don't affect that because it just says you hit on a 2-up. So, that was annoying. That the one time I actually got that off. I think the better choice is to still run those Warlocks with Smites. Leave the Runes of Fortune to the Farseers. And then finally, a Wraith Knight with 2 Shuriken Cannons and Sun Cannon and Scatter Shield. Now, is that the best loadout for the armies I'm expecting to fight? No. Is it the best defensive loadout? Yes. Can it tear tech to pieces if it works? Yes. Was it worth its points in this battle? No. Would I be taking it if I wasn't going to a tournament with 2,500 points and Titanics were expected for ease of play? No. I rarely field my Wraith Knight, but it's one of those things. I should probably buy a second Wraith. I look at it now and I think I should buy a second Wraith Knight and give it Wraith Cannons and or the Sword and Shield. Probably the Sword and Shield. And that was the Eldar list that I'm considering for this tournament. Now, I've only had one test game, and we had a lot of discussion, and the game sort of went kind of not how I expected it. I deployed in pretty much a line. We're playing Hammer and Anvil, the standard Maelstrom, where you draw up to 3 objectives. There was no card removal. Now, what won me the game was definitely the fact that I got really good to mediocre objective pulls compared to T, who got really bad objective pulls, like in his first turn. Like, he had to kill a character with one of my characters, and a couple of other really terrible objectives that he really couldn't fulfill. Eventually, he was able to actually end the game, and it ended after all the bonus objectives were done with a 6 to 8, 8 for the Eldar. So first turn, I pulled some easy objectives, which I nabbed, and then I kind of went everything into killing his Shadow Sword. And I'm not entirely sure that was the right decision. Now that I think back on that game, I probably should have focused on the Hell Hammer. Because the Shadow Sword is deadly, but it's most deadly to vehicles and Titanics, and if he was going to kill something with it, it would have just been my Wraith Knight, which is really just a really big distraction Carnifex, I think. I really do not like the Wraith Knight for the Eldar right now. If you disagree and think the Wraith Knight is fantastic, I would love to see your thoughts in the comments below, and, you know, explain to me why you think the Wraith Knight is good. And it was one of those things, however, though, if I had not destroyed the Shadow Sword in the first turn with Doom and then pouring a lot of fire into it, I was able to kill it and maim another Baneblade pretty well. But considering all he had on the board at deployment was 2 hidden characters, the Engineer and the Primaris Psyker, the 3 Baneblades, and all his infantry either in Deep Strike or with the Melter Command Squads of Tempestus inside the Valkyrie. Either way, I was going to probably be losing that super heavy turn 2 if I didn't kill either the Valkyrie or if I didn't kill the Shadow Sword. Which is exactly what happened in his turn 1. The Valkyrie flew up the board. The Tempestus got out with their stratagem after it had moved. They had their +1 to hit. Their extra hits procced on 5-ups because of the +1 to hit, and it wasn't unmodified 6s, which I found kind of ridiculous. And he was able to just melt my... He was able to melt my Wraith Knight, and then he was able to destroy one Wave Serpent as it got halfway up the field with his 2 remaining Baneblades, and then melted my Fire Dragons. And then really surprisingly failed to kill a lot of the Eldar, which was interesting. A lot of the basic little Guardians. And then turn 2, things really started to go in T's favor. I failed to get all my psychic powers off except for Conceal onto my Dark Reapers. I had to deal with the Tempestus, which were now in my flank with the Valkyrie. I had to deal with the Valkyrie, which were now in my lines, threatening my Dark Reapers, which are essential, threatening my Warlord as well, and the Warlock that was accompanying them. So I threw down my my Warp Spiders to try and counter the Valkyrie and the Tempestus and get rid of them, because I didn't like their melter weapons, didn't want to have to deal with that, nor the Valkyrie. I threw down the Swooping Hawks with them, just in case they failed. And what happened is he pulled a ridiculous stratagem, and he still had the +1, and he procced things, and we later discovered that he couldn't have actually done that because the stratagem didn't work that way on Overwatch, and his +1 went away. But he still used melter guns effectively overwatching on... well, actually, not even overwatching, to shoot them when my units came down, and kill 4 out of 10 Warp Spiders. Yeah, that was not fun. And as a result, I failed to kill his infantry completely. I failed to even get near the... No, I actually managed to deal a lot of damage to the Valkyrie through some miracles, and then I made some charges to try and tie them up, where I got stuck there for a little while, where I lost even more casualties. By the end of, due to Overwatch, I actually lost all but 2 of the swooping hawks on their way into combat. It was such amazing Overwatch on his part. And yeah, at that point, I had no psychic powers in the go, and I just sort of got, in his turn, I kind of just got shit on. My -1 wasn't helping as much. The units that I desperately needed to protect, I was putting the -2 on. And then, basically the things that were fighting him, frontline, sort of evaporated. And then the things, and I failed to kill a second Baneblade in that turn. I left it maimed with like 1 wound left, and then he healed it up in his turn. He brought his Tempestus in to grab some objectives in the backline and lay down some suppressive fire to try and catch my rear again. Unfortunately, -1 and lightning fast reactions really spared me a lot, really saved my Dark Reapers. And that was sort of it. I basically lost most of my army in that turn. I was really only left with my Psychers, no 3 Guardians, my Rangers who had just been camping up on an objective, my Dark Reapers, my Commando. What was left of my Swooping Hawks and Warp Spiders after their melee combat, which they failed to resolve and were still tied up in. Well, most of his stuff sort of flooded around and just murdered me. They really struggled to hit, but they still spiked their rolls really, really well and took out a lot of my army. And then I was kind of just left with a Fire Prism as my only real Fire Prism, and Dark Reapers on top of that as my only real anti-armor left. And he really started to catch up on objectives, and then the next turn I sort of turned it around, and it was back and forth. Now, the thing about these lists is we debated afterwards about what's better versus vehicles and tanks. Is a Shadow Sword better? Or is a Quake Cannon better? The Quake Cannon version of the Baneblade. Now, that was something we debated a lot of. The fact that bringing such a Baneblade heavy list meant he was too many targets was like not a good thing in this case. Normally, a target-rich environment is pretty good. There's always something that you need to shoot at. There's always something to kill. Your shots aren't really wasted. In this case, it was a matter of he had to waste shots though, because the Aeldari, and one of the powers of the Aeldari is that I was really capable of dictating what he shot at. I could really never let him shoot at what he wanted because of the -1s, which I could proc up to -2. With Conceal, I had up to -3 on some of my units at range. And it was interesting. However, I still thought I struggled with the whole dealing with enemy armor. We both feared that we didn't have enough armor-killing power. And we were trying to discuss ways to keep the Baneblades alive long enough to deal with that. And whether it would be better taking out the Tempestus for T's newly built Elysian regiment and putting in the Vulture gunships with their 40-odd shots at strength 6, AP nothing, 1 damage, with 2 Vultures and lots of just infantry on the ground. Or keeping the Tempestus and keeping a really low model count that was really killy but could just kind of fall over against something, say, like Knights or Tyranids, where they've got lots of bodies and lots of shots and lots of high-powered shots. Except for Knights, they're just ridiculous, and in my opinion, Knights are the worst thing to ever happen to Warhammer 40k. Anyway, those were the lists that we're thinking, and T really didn't have a lot of feedback from my list, given how it performed, given that I was able to go after all my objectives. I might have lost the vast majority of my army, but I definitely had the bigger army, and the fact that I was able to dictate pretty well. The fact that I still came out ahead barely, and he was down to one super heavy that was somewhat maimed about in its second bracket, whereas most of the infantry was either dead or I just ignored it, and most of his really big threats were gone. So I did actually manage to end up destroying his Valkyrie. I charged it with a Banshee after it went to hover with my Autarch with the Banshee mask after it went to hover mode. And it was definitely one of those moments that I definitely I missed Smite a lot in that game. So a quick little tidbit for those of you using Runes of Fortune. In my experience as an Eldar player, I've been playing them since I first started playing Warhammer. They are my oldest army. I'm most experienced with them. They have my highest win rate, simply because I've been playing with them so long. The Runes of Fortune are just not worth it over the one Mortal Wound Destructor. they're simply not, with the exception of Impair Senses and Fateful Divergence. Even then, I'd still put them on a Farseer and make sure that Farseer knows Executioner. No, now, those are the lists, that's the breakdown, and that's how the game sort of went. We only got to turn 3 because we were playing with the chess clock time limit, because the time limit for this tournament is 2 days, 6 games, 2 hours each. And, we were kind of shit-talking a bit and working through it, but we only got to the bottom of turn 3. And I'm still looking for ways to improve my list. So that's sort of the breakdown of those lists. It's an interesting sort of both of those lists, and I'd love to hear everyone's opinions on what you think of those lists. Just whatever opinions and perspectives, ideas, thoughts, anything at all. This has been Jay from Jade Productions, signing off. Thank you for watching.